Staff Sergeant Maya Collins stepped off the transport bus at Fort Henderson with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her chin held high. The Colorado military base stretched out before her like a small city, with rows of barracks, training facilities, and administrative buildings dotting the landscape. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow even in late spring. At 28, Maya had already served 2 tours overseas and earned more commendations than most soldiers saw in their entire careers. But looking at her, you wouldn't guess it. She stood barely 5'4", with a slight frame that made her look more like a college student than a decorated combat veteran. Her brown hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her uniform was pressed to perfection, but something in her dark eyes suggested she'd seen more than her share of the world's harsh realities. The base was buzzing with activity as new recruits arrived for advanced tactical training. Maya had specifically requested this assignment after her last deployment. She wanted to teach, to pass on what she'd learned to the next generation of soldiers. What she hadn't expected was the reaction she got from her new commanding officers. Colonel Harrison, a thick-set man with graying temples and 30 years of service under his belt, looked up from her file with barely concealed skepticism. His office was standard military issue, metal desk, filing cabinets, American flag in the corner, and photos of him with various dignitaries over the years. "Collins," he said, not bothering to look at her as she stood at attention, "says here you've got some interesting recommendations. 2 bronze stars, a Purple Heart." He flipped through the pages with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book. "But I have to say, you're not what I was expecting when they told me they were sending us their best instructor." Maya kept her expression neutral, though something cold settled in her stomach. "Sir, I'm here to serve in whatever capacity you see fit." Colonel Harrison finally looked up, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "The thing is, Collins, we run a tight ship here. Our training programs are intense, demanding. The soldiers who come through here are going to face real combat situations. They need instructors who can command respect, who look the part." Behind the colonel, Major nodded in agreement. Was younger, maybe 40, with the kind of perfect military bearing that screamed career advancement over actual field experience. "What the colonel is trying to say," added, "is that our trainees need to see strength. They need to believe in their instructors completely." Maya felt the familiar sting of judgment she'd faced her entire military career. Too small, too young-looking, too female. She'd heard it all before and she'd proven every single doubt wrong, but she also knew when to pick her battles. "I understand your concerns, sir," she said evenly. "I'm confident my service record speaks for itself." Colonel Harrison closed her file with a snap. "We'll see about that. For now, you'll be assisting with basic training, help out with equipment maintenance, maybe some classroom instruction on military history. Nothing too demanding while we evaluate your capabilities." The dismissal was clear. Maya saluted crisply and left the office, her jaw tight with suppressed frustration. As she walked across the base to find her assigned barracks, she could feel the stares of other soldiers. Word traveled fast in military circles, and she could already sense the whispers starting. Her first week confirmed her worst fears. Instead of leading tactical training sessions as her orders had, she found herself relegated to cleaning equipment and filing paperwork. When she tried to offer input during planning sessions, she was politely but firmly shut down. The other instructors treated her like a secretary who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. The worst part was the trainees themselves. These were young soldiers, fresh out of basic training and eager to prove themselves. They'd heard about the decorated war hero who was supposed to be their new instructor, and when they saw Maya, the disappointment was written all over their faces. "That's our instructor," she heard one of them whisper during her first classroom session on military protocol. "She looks like my little sister." Another trainee, a cocky kid named Johnson from Texas, was more direct. "Ma'am, no disrespect, but have you actually been in combat? because some of us are shipping out to active duty zones, and we need to learn from someone who's been there. Maya looked at the young faces staring at her with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. She could have told them about the convoy ambush in Afghanistan, where she'd held off insurgents for 3 hours with a broken radio and limited ammunition. She could have described the night raid in Iraq, where she'd pulled 2 wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire. Instead, she simply smiled and continued with her lesson plan. Military protocol exists for a reason, she said calmly. It saved more lives than any individual act of heroism ever could. But she could see she was losing them. They wanted war stories and tactical expertise, not lectures on proper communication procedures. By the end of the week, attendance at her sessions had dropped by half. The situation came to a head during a base-wide training exercise. Maya had been assigned to observe and take notes, essentially relegated to the sidelines, while other instructors led the actual training. She watched as Major struggled to coordinate a simulated rescue mission, his commands confused and his timing all wrong. The exercise was falling apart. The wounded soldiers lay in the field while precious minutes ticked by and barked increasingly frustrated orders at his team. Maya could see exactly what needed to happen, a simple flanking maneuver that would allow the rescue team to approach safely, but she wasn't supposed to interfere. Finally, unable to watch the disaster continue, she stepped forward. "Major, if I could suggest." "Collins," Colonel Harrison's voice cut across the training field like a whip. "Did I ask for your input?" Every head turned toward them. The entire training exercise ground to a halt as soldiers, instructors, and observers all focused on the confrontation playing out before them. Maya felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. "No, sir, You were just overstepping your bounds," Harrison continued, his voice carrying clearly across the field. "This is exactly the kind of insubordination I was worried about. You think because you've got some paperwork in your file, you can waltz in here and start giving orders." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya could feel dozens of eyes on her, could sense the mixture of embarrassment and satisfaction from those who doubted her from the beginning. She'd been publicly humiliated in front of everyone on the base, reduced to a cautionary tale about knowing your place. "Permission to return to quarters, sir," she said quietly. "Granted, and Collins," Harrison's voice followed her as she began to walk away. "Report to my office first thing Monday morning. We need to discuss your future here at Fort Henderson." As Maya walked across the field, her shoulders straight despite the humiliation burning in her chest, she could hear the whispers starting up behind her. The small, young-looking woman who'd thought she could play with the big boys had been put in her place. What none of them knew was that Maya Collins had faced down enemy fire, survived explosions that had killed stronger soldiers, and earned the respect of some of the military's most elite units. She'd been underestimated before, and she'd always found a way to prove herself. But as she sat in her small quarters that evening, staring at the commendations and medals she kept in a simple wooden box, Maya wondered if this time might be different. Fort Henderson felt less like a military base and more like an old boys club, and she was beginning to realize that her service record might not be enough to earn the respect she'd fought so hard to achieve. Outside her window, the lights of the base twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of soldiers training for the battles that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Maya knew she'd have to decide whether to keep fighting for acceptance or find another way to serve her country. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, with storm clouds gathering over the mountains. Maya had spent the weekend in her quarters, avoiding the dining hall and the curious stares of her fellow soldiers. She'd used the time to review her options and prepare for what she suspected would be a very difficult conversation with Colonel Harrison. The base felt different as she walked to the administration building. Word of Friday's incident had spread, and she could sense the shift in how people looked at her. Where there had once been indifference or mild curiosity, now there was something closer to pity. She'd become the cautionary tale Harrison had wanted to make of her. Outside the colonel's office, Major was waiting with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Collins," he said with false cheerfulness, "ready for your meeting." Maya nodded curtly and knocked on the door. Harrison's gruff voice called for her to enter. The colonel was seated behind his desk with her file open in front of him, but this time he wasn't alone. A thin, sharp-featured woman in civilian clothes sat in one of the chairs facing the desk. She had the look of someone from the Inspector General's office, or perhaps military personnel. "Collins, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez from the Base Psychological Services," Harrison said without preamble. "I've asked her to join us today to discuss some concerns about your adjustment to your role here." Maya's blood ran cold. A psych evaluation. They were questioning her mental fitness for duty. It was the oldest trick in the book for getting rid of problem soldiers. If you couldn't find fault with their performance, you questioned their psychological stability. "Sir, I don't understand," Maya said, though she understood perfectly. Dr. Martinez opened a notebook and looked at Maya with professional sympathy. "Staff Sergeant Collins, Colonel Harrison has expressed some concerns about your ability to accept the chain of command and your role within this unit. Friday's incident, combined with reports of your difficulty integrating with your fellow instructors, suggests you might be experiencing some adjustment issues." "Adjustment issues," Maya repeated flatly. "It's nothing to be ashamed of," Dr. Martinez continued. "Many soldiers struggle when transitioning from combat roles to training positions. The change in authority structure, the different expectations, it can be challenging." Maya looked between the two of them, seeing the trap being laid out in front of her. If she defended herself too strongly, they'd claim she was being insubordinate again. If she agreed to the evaluation, they'd find whatever they needed to justify removing her from her position. "What exactly are you recommending, Doctor?" Maya asked. "A temporary suspension from duties while we conduct a thorough evaluation," Harrison interjected. "Just until we can determine the best way forward." Suspension. The word felt like lead in her mouth. "It's for the good of the unit," Major added from behind her. "We can't have instructors who might be unpredictable working with our trainees." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every battle she'd fought to get here. Every enemy she'd faced, every obstacle she'd overcome, every time she'd proven herself only to have to do it all over again. And now, they wanted to take it all away with whispered concerns about her mental state. "How long?" she asked quietly. "The evaluation process typically takes 2 to 3 weeks, Dr. Martinez said. During that time, you'd be restricted to base but relieved of all duties." 2 to 3 weeks of sitting in her quarters while rumors spread, and her reputation was systematically destroyed. By the time the evaluation was complete, if it was ever completed, her effectiveness as an instructor would be finished. "I see." Maya stood up slowly, her mind racing through her options. She could fight it, demand a formal hearing, appeal up the chain of command, but she'd seen how these things went. The system protected itself, and right now, she was being treated as a threat to that system. "Report to Dr. Martinez's office this afternoon at 1400 hours to begin the evaluation process," Harrison said. "And Collins, during your suspension, you're not to discuss this matter with other personnel. Is that understood?" "Understood, sir." Maya left the office feeling like she was walking through a dream. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in front of her, and the sounds of the base felt muffled and distant. She'd survived combat zones, had earned the respect of soldiers who'd initially doubted her, had built a career on proving that determination mattered more than appearance. But none of that mattered here. Here, she was just a problem to be solved. The news of her suspension spread through the base like wildfire. By lunch, Maya could feel the stares and hear the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. In the dining hall, she sat alone at a corner table, picking at her food while groups of soldiers cast glances in her direction. "Heard she had some kind of breakdown," she overheard one of the younger trainees saying. "Started giving orders to officers, completely lost it." "My buddy said she's been acting strange since she got here," another voice added, "like she thought she was better than everyone else." Maya forced herself to take another bite of her sandwich, though it tasted like cardboard. This was what they'd wanted: to isolate her, to make her the subject of gossip and speculation, until her reputation was so damaged that removing her would seem like the obvious solution. After lunch, she returned to her quarters and sat on her narrow bed, staring at the medals in her wooden box. Each one represented a moment when she'd risen above expectations, when she'd proven that courage and skill mattered more than size or gender. The bronze stars from Afghanistan and Iraq, the Purple Heart from the roadside bomb that had nearly killed her, the commendation from the general who'd personally thanked her for saving his convoy. But here at Fort Henderson, none of that seemed to matter. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Maya opened it to find Sergeant First Class Maria, one of the few instructors who'd been even marginally friendly since her arrival. Was a veteran herself, a tough woman in her 40s who'd earned her position through sheer competence. "Can I come in?" asked, glancing around the hallway. Maya stepped aside to let her enter, looked around the sparse quarters, her eyes landing on the open box of medals. "Impressive collection," she said quietly. "I heard about what happened today." "I'm sure you did. The whole base has heard by now." Sat down in the single chair, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. "Look, Collins, I'm going to be straight with you. What they're doing isn't right, but it's not exactly surprising either." "What do you mean?" "Harrison and have been running this place like their personal kingdom for years. They don't like change, and they especially don't like anyone who might make them look bad." Paused, choosing her words carefully. "You've got more combat experience than both of them combined, and they know it." Maya sat back down on her bed, feeling a spark of hope. "Are you saying they're doing this because they feel threatened?" "I'm saying they're doing this because they can," replied bluntly, "and because they think you don't have anyone who'll fight for you." The words stung because they were true. Maya had always been a lone wolf, proving herself through individual achievement rather than building political alliances. She'd focused on being the best soldier she could be, assuming that would be enough. "So what do I do?" Maya asked. Stood up, moving toward the door. "That's up to you. But I'll tell you this, there are people on this base who know what you're really worth. Don't let them make you forget." After left, Maya sat in silence as the afternoon faded into evening. Outside her window, she could see soldiers heading to dinner, their conversations, and laughter a reminder of the community she'd been excluded from. At 1900 hours, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. "Staff Sergeant Collins." The voice was older, male, with the crisp authority of senior military leadership. "Speaking." "This is General's office. The General would like to speak with you. Are you available for a secure call in 15 minutes? Maya's heart skipped a beat. General was a legend in the military, one of the highest-ranking female officers in the Army, known for her brilliance and her absolute intolerance for politics over performance. "Yes, sir, I'll be ready." As Maya waited for the call, she couldn't help wondering how General had heard about her situation. But as she stared at her medals gleaming in the lamplight, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in days. Hoping. The secure call came through exactly 15 minutes later. Maya had positioned herself at her small desk, her service record and commendations spread out in front of her, though she wasn't sure why. General's voice was crisp and professional when the connection was established. "Staff Sergeant Collins, thank you for taking my call. I understand you're going through some difficulties at Fort Henderson." Yes, ma'am, Maya replied, unsure how much the general knew or how much she should reveal. I've been reviewing your service record, and I have to say, it's quite impressive. 2 bronze stars, a Purple Heart, multiple commendations for valor under fire. Tell me, how exactly did a soldier with your credentials end up suspended pending psychological evaluation? The question was direct, and Maya could hear something in the general's voice, not just professional interest, but something more personal. She decided to be equally direct. Ma'am, I believe my commanding officers have concerns about my ability to fit into their command structure. There was an incident during a training exercise where I attempted to offer tactical advice, and it was perceived as insubordination. Tactical advice, General repeated. Based on your combat experience, I assume. Yes, ma'am. I could see the exercise failing and soldiers potentially getting hurt even in a simulation. I thought. You thought like a soldier, the general interrupted. Like someone who's actually been in combat and knows what works and what doesn't. There was a pause, and Maya could hear papers rustling on the other end of the line. Staff Sergeant Collins, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever heard the name Valkyrie in connection with your military service? Maya's blood went cold. Valkyrie was a code name she'd heard whispered in the darkest corners of her deployment zones, a legendary female operative who'd supposedly saved dozens of units from impossible situations. Someone who could appear out of nowhere, turn the tide of a battle, and vanish just as quickly. Maya had always assumed it was just another military myth, the kind of story soldiers told to boost morale. Ma'am, I've heard stories, but I always thought Valkyrie was just legend. Not legend, Collins, very real, and very classified. The general's voice took on a different tone. I'm going to share something with you that's going to change how you see your entire military career. But first, I need your word that what I'm about to tell you stays between us until I give you permission otherwise. You have my word, ma'am. Good. Staff Sergeant Collins, your mother was Captain Sarah Collins, wasn't she? Killed in a training accident when you were 16. Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Yes, ma'am. How did you? Because Captain Sarah Collins was Valkyrie. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She stared at the wall of her quarters, trying to process what she'd just heard. Her mother, the woman she'd idolized, the reason she joined the military in the first place, had been the legendary operative whose stories had inspired soldiers across multiple theaters of operation. That's impossible, Maya whispered. I'm afraid it's not only possible, it's documented. Your mother was one of the most effective special operations soldiers this country has ever produced. The official story about her death in a training accident was cover for a classified mission that went wrong. She died saving the lives of 12 hostages in a situation that was supposed to be impossible to survive. Maya's hands were shaking now. Everything she thought she knew about her mother, about her own military service, about the path that had led her to this moment, was being rewritten in real time. Why are you telling me this now? She managed to ask. Because, Collins, talent like your mother's doesn't just disappear. It gets passed down. I've been tracking your career since you enlisted, watching for signs that you'd inherited her capabilities. Your service record isn't just impressive, it's extraordinary. The convoy ambush in Afghanistan where you held off insurgents for 3 hours. That's exactly the kind of impossible situation your mother specialized in. Maya thought about that night, the longest 3 hours of her life, when everything had gone wrong and she'd somehow found a way to keep her unit alive until backup arrived. She'd never understood how she'd managed it, had always attributed it to luck and training. There's more, General continued. The night raid in Iraq where you pulled those wounded soldiers to safety. The enemy commander later told interrogators that they'd stopped firing because they thought they were facing a full squad, not a single soldier. They called it ghost tactics, appearing and disappearing, striking from impossible angles. "I don't understand," Maya said, though part of her was beginning to. "Your mother didn't just train you to be a soldier, Collins. She trained you to be her successor, whether she realized it or not. Every bedtime story about military history, every camping trip where she taught you to move silently through the woods, every lesson about thinking 3 steps ahead, it was all preparation." Maya closed her eyes, memories flooding back. Her mother's weekend training sessions disguised as family fun. The way Sarah Collins had insisted on teaching her daughter everything from advanced first aid to escape and evasion techniques. At the time, it had seemed like a military parent being overly cautious. Now it looked like something else entirely. "Why didn't she tell me?" Maya asked. "Because she wanted you to have a choice. Valkyrie was a burden as much as an honor. Your mother hoped you might choose a different path, but she wanted you prepared just in case. And now you're facing the same thing she did. Commanders who don't understand what you're capable of, who see your size and your gender and assume you're less than you are. The difference is, this time we know what we're dealing with from the beginning." Maya stood up, packing the small confines of her quarters. "General, what exactly are you asking of me?" "I'm asking if you're ready to step into your mother's footsteps, not just as a soldier, but as something more. There are missions that require someone with your specific skill set, situations where conventional forces aren't enough. Special operations. Beyond special operations. Black Ops, Collins. The kind of missions that officially never happen, carried out by soldiers who officially don't exist." Maya stopped packing, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above her sink. She saw her mother's eyes looking back at her, the same determination that had driven Sarah Collins to become a legend. "What about Fort Henderson, the suspension?" "Leave that to me. By tomorrow morning, Colonel Harrison will be receiving new orders regarding your status. You'll be transferred to a special assignment, effective immediately. And if I say no, then you go back to fighting the same battles your mother fought, proving yourself over and over again to people who will never truly see your worth. But Collins," the general's voice softened slightly, "your mother would be proud of what you've accomplished. She'd also want you to know that you have choices she never had." After the call ended, Maya sat in the darkness of her quarters, processing everything she'd learned. Her mother hadn't just been a soldier, she'd been Valkyrie, the ghost warrior whose legend had inspired Maya's own military career. And now, 28 years later, Maya was being offered the chance to follow in those footsteps. Outside her window, Fort Henderson continued its evening routine, unaware that everything was about to change. Maya picked up her mother's picture from her nightstand, a formal military portrait showing Captain Sarah Collins in dress uniform, her eyes bright with the confidence of someone who knew her worth regardless of what others thought. "What would you do, Mom?" Maya whispered to the photograph. But deep down, she already knew the answer. Sarah Collins had never backed down from a challenge, had never let other people's limitations define her possibilities. She'd become Valkyrie not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Maya opened her laptop and began typing a response to General's aide. By morning, Staff Sergeant Maya Collins would be gone from Fort Henderson, but Valkyrie's daughter would be ready to begin her real mission. The legend was about to return, and this time she wouldn't be fighting alone. Maya woke before dawn to find a sealed envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with coordinates, a time, and the words, "Come alone. Bring nothing but your service weapon." It was signed with a simple M, General. The coordinates led to an abandoned training facility 20 miles north of Fort Henderson, in the mountains where the early morning mist still clung to the pine trees. Maya had borrowed a jeep from the motor pool, using her access codes before anyone could ask questions about her suspended status. The facility looked like it had been unused for years: crumbling concrete buildings, rusted chain-link fences, and weeds growing through cracked pavement. But as Maya approached the main gate, she noticed subtle signs that the abandonment was more recent than it appeared. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, security cameras that looked too new for a derelict facility. A figure emerged from the shadows near the gate. Maya's hand instinctively went to her sidearm before she recognized the silhouette general herself, dressed in combat fatigues instead of her usual dress uniform. "Punctual," the general said with approval. "That's good. Valkyrie was never late to anything." "Ma'am, what is this place?" "This is where we find out if you're really Sarah Collins' daughter, or just a soldier with an impressive service record who happens to share her last name." Gestured toward the main building. "Your mother trained here in the early days of the Valkyrie program. Today, you're going to face the same test she did." They walked through the facility in the gray pre-dawn light. Maya could see that despite its abandoned appearance, the buildings were actually well-maintained. Fake rust and strategically placed debris couldn't hide the fact that the electrical systems were modern and the structural integrity was solid. "How many people know about this place?" Maya asked. "6, including us. The Valkyrie program exists in the deepest levels of military black ops. Even most generals don't know it's real." Stopped in front of a heavy steel door. "But before we go any further, I need to know you understand what you're walking into." "I understand that my mother was Valkyrie, and that you think I might be able to follow in her footsteps." "It's more than that, Collins. Valkyrie isn't just a soldier. She's a ghost, a myth, a force that appears when conventional military options have failed. The original Valkyrie, your mother, was deployed on 47 missions over 8 years. She had a 100% success rate and 0 confirmed kills." "0 kills?" Maya was confused. "How is that possible in combat operations?" Smiled grimly. "Because Valkyrie doesn't kill unless there's absolutely no other option. She neutralizes threats, extracts assets, completes objectives, and disappears. Your mother once infiltrated a terrorist compound, rescued 6 hostages, and escaped without anyone even knowing she'd been there until the hostages showed up at a U.S. embassy 3 countries away." They entered the building, and Maya found herself in what looked like a high-tech training facility disguised as ruins. Computer terminals lined one wall, and she could see doorways leading to what appeared to be elaborate simulation chambers. The tests your mother faced were designed to evaluate not just physical capabilities, but mental resilience, tactical thinking, and moral judgment under extreme pressure, explained. "Some soldiers can fight, some can think. Very few can do both while maintaining their humanity. And if I fail, then you go back to Fort Henderson, serve out your suspension, and eventually find another assignment where your considerable talents will be wasted on people who can't see past their own limitations." His voice was matter of fact. "But if you succeed, you become something that can make a real difference in the world." Maya looked around the facility, thinking about her mother, about the legend of Valkyrie, about the suspension waiting for her back at Fort Henderson. "What's the first test?" Led her to a door marked Simulation Chamber 1. Inside was what appeared to be a mock-up of a Middle Eastern village, complete with narrow alleys, multi-story buildings, and realistic environmental details. "Hostage extraction," explained. 12 civilian hostages held by an unknown number of armed opponents in an urban environment. Conventional assault would likely result in civilian casualties. Your objective is to extract all hostages safely. "What are my resources?" "Whatever you can find or improvise. You have your sidearm and whatever's available in the simulation environment." Handed her an earpiece. "I'll be monitoring, but you're on your own once you enter." Maya clipped the earpiece in place and checked her weapon. As she prepared to enter the simulation, his voice stopped her. "Collins, your mother's record time for this scenario was 18 minutes with 0 casualties, hostages, or opponents. Most special forces teams can't complete it at all without accepting losses. The simulation began the moment Maya stepped through the entrance. The village came alive around her, sounds of civilian activity mixed with the harsh voices of armed men, the smell of cooking food and diesel fuel, the oppressive heat of a Middle Eastern afternoon. Maya moved through the narrow streets like a shadow, her mother's training coming back to her in ways she'd never consciously recognized. The camping trips where Sarah Collins had taught her to move silently through the woods. The games of hide-and-seek that had really been lessons in camouflage and observation. The bedtime stories about military history that had actually been tactical instruction disguised as entertainment. She identified the hostile positions by sound and movement, mapping the entire compound in her mind before making her first move. When she did act, it was with a precision that surprised even her. Smoke grenades improvised from materials found in the village created confusion while she moved from building to building. Opponents were neutralized with non-lethal precision. Pressure points her mother had taught her as first aid techniques, restraint holds disguised as wrestling moves from their backyard games. The hostages were extracted in groups of 3, led through carefully planned escape routes while Maya maintained overwatch from impossible angles. When the simulation ended, all 12 civilians were safe, all opponents were neutralized but alive, and Maya had accomplished the mission in 16.5 minutes. His voice crackled through the earpiece. "Impressive, your mother would be proud." But as Maya emerged from the simulation chamber, she could see that the general wasn't finished. 3 more doors led to additional simulation chambers, and was already walking toward the second one. "That was just the beginning," said. "Valkyrie doesn't just complete missions, she does the impossible. Are you ready for the real test?" Maya thought about Fort Henderson, about Colonel Harrison's dismissive attitude, about the psychological evaluation designed to end her career. Then she thought about her mother, about the legend of Valkyrie, about the possibility of finally using her skills for something that truly mattered. "I'm ready," she said. But as they approached the second simulation chamber, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to face something that would change her life forever. The tests were getting harder, and she was beginning to understand that becoming Valkyrie meant leaving Maya Collins behind. The question was she prepared to make that sacrifice? The second simulation chamber was different. Where the first had been a tactical exercise, this one felt personal. Maya found herself in a recreation of Forward Operating Base Chapman, the same base where she'd served during her second deployment to Afghanistan. "This scenario is based on actual events," his voice explained through the earpiece. "February 15th, 3 years ago, a coordinated attack on the base where you were stationed. In reality, the attack was repelled, but 12 soldiers were killed and 37 wounded." Maya's breath caught. She remembered that night, the rocket attacks, the breach in the perimeter, the chaos as insurgents poured through the gap in their defenses. She'd been part of the response team that had eventually driven them back, but the cost had been devastating. "Your objective is to prevent those casualties while still repelling the attack," continued. "You have complete knowledge of how the battle actually unfolded, but you're operating alone, without backup or air support." The simulation began, and Maya was immediately transported back to that terrible night. The first rockets impacted just after midnight, their explosions lighting up the darkness and sending shrapnel whistling through the air. Alarms blared as soldiers scrambled from their bunks, grabbing weapons and racing to defensive positions. But this time, Maya wasn't part of a unit. She was Valkyrie, moving through the chaos like a ghost, appearing where she was needed most and vanishing before anyone could track her movements. She reached the perimeter breach moments before the first insurgents broke through. Instead of engaging them directly, she triggered a controlled explosion that collapsed part of the barrier, channeling the attackers into a kill zone where the base's automated defenses could handle them without risking soldier casualties. When a rocket struck the communications center, Maya was already there, pulling wounded personnel to safety and establishing alternate command links before the officers even realized they'd lost contact with headquarters. Each crisis was met before it could develop into a catastrophe. Fires were extinguished before they could spread to ammunition storage. Wounded soldiers found themselves mysteriously transported to safety by hands they never saw. Enemy positions were neutralized by precisely placed charges that appeared as if from nowhere. Maya moved through the battle like her mother's ghost, anticipating needs, solving problems, saving lives. When insurgents tried to flank the main defensive line, they found their path blocked by obstacles that hadn't been there moments before. When ammunition ran low at critical positions, fresh supplies appeared without explanation. The simulation ended with the attack repelled and 0 friendly casualties. Maya stood in the aftermath, looking at a base that bore the scars of battle but had lost none of its defenders. His voice was quiet when it came through the earpiece. Your mother ran this same scenario 4 times. Her best result was 3 casualties. You just achieved something she thought was impossible. Maya removed the earpiece, her hands shaking slightly. The weight of what she just accomplished was overwhelming. She hadn't just completed a training exercise. She'd rewritten history, saved lives that had been lost, prevented tragedies that had haunted her for years. How is this possible? She asked as she emerged from the chamber. I'm good, but I'm not. I'm not superhuman. Was waiting with a tablet, reviewing the simulation data. Your mother asked the same question after her first advanced test. The answer isn't that you're superhuman. It's that you're operating on a level most people can't comprehend. You see patterns others miss, anticipate problems before they develop, find solutions that exist outside conventional thinking. But those soldiers at Chapman, they really died. Yes, they did, because Valkyrie wasn't there. His voice was gentle but firm. Your mother was deployed elsewhere that night, on a mission that saved different lives. That's the burden of this role, Collins. You can't save everyone, but you can save the ones you're sent to protect. Maya nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with the Valkyrie legacy. What's the 3rd test? Hesitated for the first time since Maya had arrived. The 3rd test is the one your mother failed the first time she took it. It's also the one that made her realize she was ready to become Valkyrie. They moved to the final simulation chamber, and Maya could sense immediately that this one was different. The air felt heavier, charged with tension that had nothing to do with the technology. This scenario has no predetermined outcome, explained. It adapts to your choices, presents you with moral dilemmas that have no clear right answers. Your mother called it the crucible. It either breaks you or transforms you into something more than you were before. Maya stepped into the chamber and found herself in a scenario that felt all too familiar. A small military outpost under siege, supplies running low, wounded soldiers who needed evacuation. But as the simulation progressed, she realized the true test wasn't tactical, it was ethical. She was given intelligence about a high-value target in a nearby village. Capturing him could end the siege and save her soldiers, but it would require her to abandon civilian refugees who were counting on her protection. She was offered backup support, but accepting it would mean revealing her identity and compromising future Valkyrie operations. Each decision led to new dilemmas. Save the soldiers under her protection or prevent a terrorist attack on a school. Maintain her cover or expose herself to save innocent lives. Follow orders from command or trust her instincts about what was right. Maya found herself making choices she'd never had to make as a regular soldier. As Maya Collins, she'd always had clear orders, defined objectives, a chain of command to provide guidance. As Valkyrie, she was alone with her conscience and the weight of consequences that extended far beyond any single mission. The simulation pushed her to her breaking point. When she chose to save the refugees over capturing the target, the siege intensified. When she maintained her cover, soldiers died who might have lived. When she trusted her instincts over orders, she prevented a disaster but violated direct commands from superior officers. Finally, the simulation presented her with an impossible choice. She could save a group of wounded soldiers, but only by sacrificing herself. Or she could preserve her own life in the Valkyrie program, but 12 men and women would die. Maya stared at the scenario, understanding that this was the real test. Not her tactical skills or her physical capabilities, but her willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice when necessary. She made her choice. When the simulation ended, Maya found herself back in the chamber, very much alive but fundamentally changed. She understood now what it meant about transformation. She wasn't the same person who had walked into that room. Was waiting outside, studying her face carefully. "How do you feel?" "Different," Maya said honestly. "Like I've been carrying something I didn't know was there, and now I can feel its weight." "That's responsibility," replied. "Not just for missions or objectives, but for the consequences of every choice you make. Your mother described it as seeing the whole board instead of just your piece." They walked back toward the entrance of the facility in comfortable silence. The sun was fully up now, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. Maya could see Fort Henderson in the distance, looking small and insignificant from this height. "So what happens now?" Maya asked. "Now you decide. You can go back to Fort Henderson, serve out your suspension, and eventually find another assignment where you'll be just another soldier fighting the same battles over and over. Or you can become Valkyrie and take on missions that matter on a scale most people can't imagine." Maya thought about Colonel Harrison, about Major, about the psychological evaluation waiting for her. Then she thought about the simulations, about the lives she could save, about the legend her mother had built, and the legacy she could continue. If I become Valkyrie, what happens to Maya Collins? She disappears. Officially, Staff Sergeant Maya Collins will receive a medical discharge due to psychological evaluation concerns. Unofficially, she'll be transferred to a classified unit that doesn't exist on any organizational chart. In my life. Your life becomes the mission. No permanent relationships, no fixed address, no identity beyond what each assignment requires. Paused. It's a lonely path, Collins. Your mother struggled with that isolation until the day she died. Maya looked out at the mountains, thinking about her empty quarters at Fort Henderson, about the friends she'd lost to deployment and distance, about the family she'd never had time to build. In many ways, she was already living the isolated life described. But the work matters, Maya said. It wasn't a question. The work matters more than anything else you could do with your life, confirmed. Maya took a deep breath, tasting the mountain air and feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. When she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "Then I accept. I'll become Valkyrie." Smiled, and for the first time since Maya had met her, the expression seemed genuinely warm. "Welcome to the program, Agent Collins. Your first mission briefing is tomorrow at 800. As they drove back down the mountain, Maya caught one last glimpse of Fort Henderson through the trees. Somewhere down there, Colonel Harrison was probably preparing for her psychological evaluation, confident that he'd successfully removed a problem from his command. He had no idea that he'd just helped create something far more powerful than the soldier he tried to destroy. Maya Collins was gone, but Valkyrie had returned. And this time, she was ready for whatever the world might throw at her. 6 months later, Colonel Harrison was having the worst day of his military career. It had started with a phone call from the Pentagon at 5:30 hours, continued with an unscheduled inspection by a team of officers he'd never seen before, and was about to get much worse. He sat in his office, staring at a folder marked classified that had been placed on his desk an hour ago. Inside were documents that made his blood run cold, investigation reports, witness statements, personnel reviews that painted a picture of systematic discrimination and abuse of authority at Fort Henderson. Major sat across from him, his usually perfect military bearing showing cracks of stress. "Sir, I don't understand how this happened. The investigation was supposed to be routine." "Routine," Harrison laughed bitterly. "We're looking at congressional hearings, inspector general reviews, and possible criminal charges. This is about as far from routine as it gets." The investigation had started with what seemed like a simple inquiry into the psychological evaluation process for suspended personnel. But it had quickly expanded to encompass everything from discriminatory practices in instructor assignments to the mysterious disappearance of Staff Sergeant Maya Collins from the base 6 months earlier. Collins. Harrison still didn't understand what had happened there. One day she was suspended pending evaluation. The next day her quarters were empty, and her transfer orders had come through channels so classified that even he couldn't access them. Dr. Martinez claimed no knowledge of any psychological evaluation, and all records of the proposed assessment had vanished from the system. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Enter." General walked into the office, followed by 2 other officers Harrison didn't recognize. Was a legend in the Army, but Harrison had never expected to see her at his small training facility. "Colonel Harrison, Major," said without preamble, "please remain seated." Harrison felt his stomach drop. When a 3-star general told you to remain seated, it usually meant your career was about to end. "General, ma'am, if this is about the Collins situation." "The Collins situation is exactly what this is about," interrupted, "along with several other situations that have come to our attention regarding the management of this facility." One of the officers opened a briefcase and removed a thick stack of files. "Colonel, over the past 6 months, we've conducted a comprehensive review of Fort Henderson's training programs. What we've found is a pattern of discrimination, abuse of authority, and systematic undermining of qualified personnel." Harrison tried to maintain his composure. "Ma'am, I run a tight ship here. Our training standards are among the highest." "Your training standards are irrelevant when qualified instructors are being relegated to clerical duties based on gender and appearance rather than competence," cut him off. "Staff Sergeant Collins had more combat experience than any instructor on this base, yet you assigned her to filing paperwork." "Collins was insubordinate," interjected. "She tried to give orders during a training exercise." "She tried to prevent a training disaster," the second officer corrected, consulting his notes. "According to witnesses, Major's exercise was failing, and Collins offered tactical advice that would have saved time and prevented potential injuries." Walked to the window, looking out at the training fields where soldiers were running through exercises. "Colonel, do you know what happened to Staff Sergeant Collins after she left here?" "No, ma'am. Her transfer was classified above my clearance level." "She was reassigned to a special operations unit where her talents could be properly utilized," said. "In the past 6 months, she's completed missions that have saved hundreds of lives and prevented several international incidents. The woman you tried to destroy has become one of our most valuable assets." Harrison felt the walls closing in around him. "General, if we made errors in judgment." "Errors in judgment," turned back to face him, her expression cold. "Colonel, you attempted to ruin the career of one of the finest soldiers this country has produced because she didn't fit your narrow definition of what a warrior should look like." The third officer, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Colonel Harrison, Major, you're both hereby relieved of your duties pending a full investigation into your conduct. You will surrender your commands immediately and report to the Inspector General's office at the Pentagon within 72 hours." His face went white. "Ma'am, surely there's been some mistake." "The only mistake was allowing officers like you to remain in positions of authority for as long as you have," replied. This base will be placed under new management, and its training programs will be completely restructured. As the two disgraced officers were escorted from the building, remained in the office, looking at the photographs on Harrison's wall, pictures of him with various dignitaries, award ceremonies, formal military functions, all the trappings of a successful career that was now in ruins. Her secure phone buzzed. She answered on the first ring. "Here. General, this is Valkyrie. Mission complete. The trafficking network has been dismantled and all hostages have been recovered safely." Smiled. Even over the encrypted connection, she could hear the quiet confidence in Maya's voice, the same confidence that had been dismissed and belittled at Fort Henderson. "Excellent work as always. Are you ready for your next assignment?" "Always ready, ma'am." After ending the call, walked out onto the training field where soldiers were practicing close-quarters combat. She could see some of the same doubt and skepticism in their faces that Harrison had shown toward Maya, young soldiers who still equated size with strength, appearance with capability. They would learn, just as Maya had learned, that true strength came from within. And maybe, if they were lucky, they would never have to face the consequences of underestimating someone based on assumptions rather than evidence. Sergeant First Class approached, saluting crisply. "General, ma'am, I wanted to thank you for what you've done here." "Thank me." "For Collins, ma'am, for standing up for what was right. A lot of us knew what was happening wasn't fair, but we didn't know how to fight it." Returned the salute. "Sergeant, I want you to understand something. What happened here wasn't about one soldier or one injustice. It was about a system that was failing to recognize and utilize talent. That system is changing, starting with this base." "Ma'am, if I may ask, what really happened to Collins? The rumors are that she just vanished." Looked up at the mountains surrounding the base, thinking about Maya out there somewhere, using skills that Fort Henderson had tried to suppress to save lives and protect the innocent. "She found her place, Sergeant. Sometimes that's all any of us can ask for." As drove away from Fort Henderson for the last time, she reflected on the strange turns that military careers could take. Maya Collins had come to the base as a decorated soldier looking for a chance to teach and serve. She'd been broken down, dismissed, and nearly destroyed by small-minded men who couldn't see past their own prejudices. But from that destruction had emerged something greater, Valkyrie reborn, carrying on a legacy of service that transcended rank, politics, and the petty concerns of career advancement. Harrison would face their hearings, probably receive administrative punishments, and fade into obscurity. Fort Henderson would get new leadership and better training programs. But somewhere in the world, in places where conventional forces couldn't go and ordinary soldiers couldn't operate, Valkyrie was making a difference. Maya Collins had found her true calling, not despite the obstacles she'd faced, but because of them. The legend lived on, stronger than ever, carried by a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come from the darkest defeats. And in a world that still too often judged soldiers by their appearance rather than their character, that was a lesson worth remembering. The story of Maya Collins was over. The legend of Valkyrie had just begun. The end.